National security, deportation, build the wall. Immigration is no new issue to the public debate, but in a world seemingly defined by polarization, we hear contradictory updates.
The president has done more to secure the border and to deal with this issue of immigration than anybody else. He really has. We want to do this in a bipartisan way. Republicans refuse to do that.
It's a disgrace. The laws are so bad. Democrat-backed policies have left our borders overrun, our detention facilities overwhelmed, and our hospitals, schools, and public resources overburdened.
We're getting 10,000 migrants a month. And everyone is saying it's New York City's problem. Every community in this city is going to be impacted. This issue will destroy New York City. Destroy New York City.
So what's really going on? Have Christian charity and compassion been hijacked? To get to the bottom of this thorny issue, we are pleased to be joined by Mark Morgan, the former acting commissioner of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection in the Trump administration. Welcome to the EDIFY podcast, Mark. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Thanks, Mary. I appreciate you guys having me.
So, Mark, you've said that we can't start talking about immigration until we start talking about national security. What do you mean by that statement?
Yeah, Mary, I tell you, this is one of the most fundamental aspects of where I really feel people are completely misunderstanding what's happening. There's a difference between what's happening on our border security, which is synonymous with national security, and immigration. Those are two separate things. But what's happened, especially under this administration and open border advocates across this country, they want to convolute the issue. For example, they want to remove the word illegal from illegal immigration, because what they want to do is make everything that's happening on our southwest border about immigration. Because then if you're against what's happening on our southwest border, you're against immigration. And if you're against immigration, you're against brown people. And if you're against brown people, you're a racist. That's the narrative. And that really starts the domino effect of our compassion being hijacked. This is legal immigration is a separate issue, and it's a separate discussion from border security, which in large part is being driven by illegal immigration.
Right. So they're very distinct issues.
Very
and
distinct.
I think, yeah, it's been very interesting to watch all of this unfold, especially in recent months because of the huge influx in primarily Venezuelan immigration, illegal immigration, economic migrants coming over the border. And people do have compassion for them. They are fleeing a very, very bad government in a very badly run country. And so no one can fault them for that. But when the cities that are receiving them and the states that are receiving them cannot accommodate the vast number that are coming in, and I think more importantly, to your point about national security, they aren't able to distinguish who is here simply because they want a better life for their families and for themselves, which everybody can understand, and who are here to do the American people harm. And when you were in your position, did you have ways and means by which you could help detect that, or is it detectable?
Yeah, it is. And one of the best ways you can detect it is reduce the massive amount of the flow of illegal immigrants, right? So when you literally open your borders like this administration has, they've told the entire world, if you come to our borders, you're going to be released into the interior of the country. And illegal aliens from 180 different countries have heard that call. There's only 195 recognized countries in the face of the planet. We've encountered people from 180 of them. And so, Mary, the challenge is when you have, now it's nearing almost 8 million in the past 36, 37 months, every aspect of our system is overwhelmed. So you start with that premise right there, is that we're completely overwhelmed. And so we're not able to actually, one, detect and apprehend everybody. We talked about the 1.7, nearing 1.8 million known gotaways, those who evade apprehension. And we know among them, look, not everybody is bad, but not everybody is good. And I think that's the frustrating part too with the liberal media. They're only telling the American people a small slice. They're intentionally omitting the totality of the circumstances. And while the majority of those coming illegally are decent people, There are still many that are not. There are murderers, rapists, pedophiles, aggravated felons, gang members, and potential national security threats that are coming across our border every single day. And Mary, if I could too, it's important because I think this goes to the heart of our compassion, which I think is one of the greatest elements that makes our country one of the greatest countries on the face of the planet. But here's the problem. To the perception to you think you're addressing one issue, if you're causing a complex series of additional issues tenfold worse than the one you think you're solving, is that the right way? Of course not. Right. And that's what we're doing. When you facilitate and look the other way for illegal immigration, the jeopardy that you're posing to our safety, our health, and national security is exponentially increased. That doesn't make sense to me. And the other thing too, a lot of people don't understand is that when we say the overwhelming people coming, as you said, Mary, you're spot on, they're economic migrants. Guess what? That's not a valid asylum claim. Asylum is for a narrow subset of individuals who are the victims of state-sponsored persecution because of their involvement in a protected class, like religion, for example. If you're just wanting to climb the economic ladder or have better economic conditions, that's not a valid asylum claim. And so that's the challenge that we have. So this is about illegal immigration, which pulls resources off the front line, off our national security mission, and threatens every aspect of our nation's safety and national security.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Mark. I live in Chicago, and we have now, at last count, probably close to 22,000 Venezuelan, about 95% of them are from Venezuela, migrants here who, it's interesting when the mainstream media interviews them, they say things like, and I don't have any reason to believe this isn't true, like we were promised that when we came here to Chicago, we would have apartments and hot meals every day and jobs would be waiting for us. And instead, they're sleeping on the floor of O'Hare Airport. We have hundreds of migrants at O'Hare, thousands that are staying now in tents in the park. And it's winter in Chicago now, and it's 20 degrees at night. And the Chicago police put out a bulletin to all of its police departments warning that some known Venezuelan gang members are now here and now are operating in Chicago, who came through, to your point, with people who are simply seeking a better life economically. And they can't tell who's good from who's bad. But what's troubling is that the large majority, there are women and children, but the large majority are single men in their 20s and early 30s. And I am concerned about other groups kind of merging in with them and coming in along with them, for example, members of Al-Qaeda. And I don't think that's crazy talk to think that they might kind of assimilate into the group and come in. Have you heard anything about that kind of concern from your former colleagues? Yeah.
So remember, I also spent 20 years in the FBI. And one of my assignments, I was a special agent in charge of the FBI's division on El Paso. I actually lived and worked in the border for 2 years. From my office window, you could see Juarez, Mexico. I oversaw counterterrorism investigation as well. Maria, this goes to the heart of the issue. What I'm saying is how the media is painting a very narrow picture, and they're intentionally omitting key aspects of what's happening at our border from the American people for them to make an informed decision about actually what's happening. And what you're talking about goes to the heart of the national security issue. Let me give you just a couple of stats. In the past 36 months, we've apprehended just at the southwest border over 285 illegal aliens trying to enter our country illegally that are on the FBI's terror screening database. In addition to that, we've apprehended tens of thousands of what we call special interest aliens, SIAs, that come from countries that we know harbor, sponsor, and facilitate terrorism. So think about that. And by the way, the 285 that we've apprehended on the terror screening database, that's more than the past 10 years combined. And so we keep those numbers in perspective because that's what we've apprehended. Now let's go back to the almost 1.8 million known gotaways, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't have to be a border security expert, just common sense, right? If we've apprehended that many, the law of averages says there's a lot that have gotten through. And I often remind people, it only took 13 terrorists to carry out the worst terrorist attack that our homeland has ever seen. So people ask me, Mary, hey, so do you think the threat is coming? And I say, no, I think it's already here. And just recently, the director of the FBI, under testimony, has said that the wide open southwest border poses a significant national security threat. DHS has put out reports saying the same thing. A local CBP office in San Diego put out the same thing. The director in his recent testimony also talked about that the war in Israel carried out by a terrorist organization, Hamas, has absolutely increased the national threat that we have in our homeland as well.
I mean, and there could be, terrorist cells in every major city in this country. And it sounds, like you're in some kind of Tom Clancy novel, but it could actually be true.
And this is what I say a lot of times too, is I say after 9/11, I actually believe in some ways we're more vulnerable now than we were pre 9/11. This country's done a lot of good stuff, improving our intelligence capabilities. We've closed and hardened some vulnerabilities we had, especially in the airways. But when you look at our southwest border, our border is more porous and open than it was prior to 9/11.
My mom and dad emigrated here from Scotland, and my dad had to wait for 2 years in Canada before he could come into the U.S. He had to prove he had a job and he had to prove he had a sponsor. So he had to do both of those things before he could come in. And what I'm noticing, and you can talk to people in the Black community here, first generation Mexican Americans who are here, or Ukrainians, they're very, very resentful of this new wave that's coming in, because you get the sense like, listen, first of all, especially in the Black community, there's going to be a flashpoint. I think in New York and Chicago are going to be the two key sources for this, because the resources for the Black community are being displaced for the migrant communities that are coming in. I mean, park districts being shut down. And, I understand it from a humanitarian perspective. We have to put these people somewhere. They can't be sleeping at O'Hare Airport. But it's been interesting to see the real friction that now exists between very recent immigrants. I'm talking within the last, one generation, and the new immigration that's coming in. Did you see any of that when you were in your previous position? Is this something the government would be keeping tabs on?
Yeah, tabs specifically on what?
Well, like the tensions growing between the two communities, because I can see this becoming a real public safety issue.
Absolutely.
That there are tensions between recent immigrants and these new immigrants.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you have the volume you see right now. Absolutely. What I can say is I didn't see that under the previous administration because we didn't have the volume we have right now. In fact, look, and this is just fact, under the Trump administration, we had reduced illegal immigration to a decade's low. By February of 2020, we had reduced illegal immigration by 85%. We were putting more resources back on the border. So the answer is not to deal with the crisis after we've already allowed it in the United States. Our focus should be a proactive, preventative approach to actually deter and reduce the flow of illegal migration. Mary, we have hundreds and hundreds, a couple of billion people around the world that would love to come to the United States. That's just not reasonable. It's not sustainable. Now, we are, again, as part of the most compassionate country in the world, we're giving hundreds of billions of dollars to countries all over the world to help their economic growth and development, including all three central and northern triangle countries. We did that under the Trump administration. It was done under the Obama administration and the administration before that. That really should be our efforts. The other thing that people forget about, every year, including under the Trump administration, we swear in about 800,000 to 1 million migrants to be legal citizens in the United States. And so when I talk to migrants throughout the world, including Chicago, and I do, they're resentful. The ones that came here and did it lawfully, they're angry and they're resentful. There's a fundamental fairness. So you want to talk about a Christian aspect and fundamental value and a compassion. What about those that actually did it the lawful, correct way? And now they're having these individuals jump in front of the line. The other issue is Americans. I mean, right now, when you have 8 million, which they've allowed in over half of those, plus the 1.8 million known gotaways, they're competing against an already marginalized workforce for jobs. So the boiling point is real. I talk to people from Chicago on a regular basis, and I hear the exact same thing. And so it's not just a national security issue. It's not just a safety issue. It's also an economic issue. And there have been reports just recently. Mark Green, the chairman of the House Homeland Security, just published a fourth report out of a series of 5, where he said that it costs the taxpayers approximately almost $500 billion to support illegal immigration.
Yeah, it's the numbers are just, you can't wrap your head around them because they're so big. They're almost, incomprehensible. But the other interesting part is when the war in Ukraine first started, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and Chicago has a big Ukrainian community, so we took in a multitude of refugees. And people are saying, well, everyone in Chicago was so welcoming of the people of Ukraine. And there's some real distinctions. First of all, there was a Ukrainian community here already to receive people. They had relations or relations of relations or friends of friends, but somebody who would be able to help them assimilate, A, and B, they were fleeing war. I mean, these are children and women largely who were coming. The men stayed behind to fight. It was the vulnerable that we were receiving here, and everybody was on board to want to help them. And I'm not saying that people here aren't trying to be kind to, the Venezuelans who are here. Everyone is, but you can't even compare the two because the reasons that they're here are so distinct.
Yeah, I agree, Mary. Everything you just said, the moral equivalency is not there, right, Mary? It's just not there. But let me back up here, and this may be something where we start to get into some touchy areas again because of the compassion. What I'll say, even with the Ukrainians, right, is here's what the international standard is, and here's what history would tell us. If you really wanted to be compassionate, when you take somebody, you really should be looking to settle them in a geographical region, right, that is consistent with their culture, their language, and their job skills. And so that's why areas like Poland and other countries in that area really should be the ones to be stepping up to take in the majority of the Ukrainians. Because at the end of the day, the goal should be, once that war is over, that they're going to go back to their country, right? Because they have the same pride in their country that we have in ours. And so that's another issue we don't talk enough about. And again, though, when we talk about those individuals that are economic migrants looking for a better life, keep in mind, what people don't understand is many of these migrants have lived outside their country for a long time. For example, in Brazil, there are many migrants from many countries that have gone and traveled to Brazil. They're doing pretty good. They're doing okay, and they've had jobs and they're safe and secure. But that's not the goal. The goal is to come to America. And so that's what I mean. This is a very complex issue of which, unfortunately, the American people are, to a large degree, being force-fed misinformation and, quite frankly, just flat-out lies from this administration and open border advocates with respect to the real issue. And again, when I was commissioner, I traveled to all 3 Northern Triangle countries. We were given those countries hundreds of millions of dollars to support their security infrastructure, to support their ports of entry, to support more development coming in and corporations from outside to help their economic growth and development. That's the kind of things that, as the United States, that we should be focused on.
That's a very interesting perspective. And, I know that a lot of Polish families have taken in Ukrainian migrants. And but as you say, the end goal for many of them is to get to America.
It is.
I mean, they're perfectly happy to be safe in Poland or in Romania or wherever, but the end goal is the U.S., which I think is the case for, the number of other migrants. But so let me just touch on something similar. What's your perspective on family immigration policy? So some say that the definition of family should just be spouses and then those spouses' minor children, so a nuclear, biological, intact family, and not siblings or elderly parents or married adult children, any of that. That would lower, just having those particular restrictions would lower the burden on the system. Do you agree with that particular set of restrictions?
Well, what I would say is under this administration, though, Mary, it wouldn't, because it doesn't matter. This administration is letting everybody in. It doesn't matter what the definition of the law is, they're not abiding by the law. And so if you actually enforce the law, I think the current definition is satisfactory. Because again, if somebody wants to come to the United States lawfully, right, it doesn't matter whether they are a biological parent or an uncle or any of the other definitions, right? Because they will go through the lawful process to gain entry. So what you're
Right.
talking about is when somebody comes to our country illegally and undocumented. See, that's what a lot of people don't understand, is the reason why we have those very narrow restrictions is because 95% of who we're coming in contact with, one, are entering illegally, and two, they have no documentation. We have no
idea
way.
who they are.
Right. So we have no way of proving whether they're a parent or a distant cousin or an uncle. It's very, very challenging. That's why in the Trump administration, we actually forward deployed a robust DNA, rapid DNA process so that we could actually determine fake families. That's something a lot of people don't realize, because families at the time that was your Willy Wonka ticket. It was your automatic passport in the United States if you came as a family. So there were actually grown men that were renting and buying kids to form a fake family to enter the United States. So we started doing DNA, by which, guess what? This administration stopped that program.
So, Mark, I have the privilege of serving on the board of a pregnancy center in the Chicago area, and we have 2 maternity homes where expectant moms can live with us for as long as they need to. And we do have a migrant who went across the Darien Gap by herself, and she was held in captivity because the cartel wanted her child. They were waiting for her to give birth. She managed to escape. It's a very dramatic story, and it sounds like, something from a movie. But they wanted access to her child, which really puzzled me. But when we were sort of getting to know each other prior to this interview, you were telling me that this would not be an uncommon scenario, buying and selling children. Can you explain that a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah, Mary. And again, this goes back to the heart of our compassion has been hijacked. And I really feel if American people fully understood one example we're talking about right now, they would join shoulder to shoulder with me to shut down the border. Although I haven't heard of that specific story you've mentioned, that's not out of the realm of possibilities, in my opinion. And I'll give you an example why. When I was commissioner, there was when I was chief of the Border Patrol, there was a 51-year-old Honduran man that actually bought an infant from the mother. Right? And why? Why was this happening? Because at the time, because of a really bad lower court judicial decision called the Flores Settlement Agreement, if you entered illegally into the United States as a family, we could not detain you while you're going through your process. You had to be released. That was part of the catch and release program. And so what they said, the cartel said, hey, look, single adult male, you want to get in, you pay us enough, we'll get you a kid. So not only were kids literally being sold to form a fake family, but then they were also being rented. And so a big scheme developed. So they would rent a kid. So a single adult male would rent a child, get across the border. A lot of times, because no documentation, we had no idea who to prove who they were successful. They would enter, then the male would just be lost somewhere in the United States. They would send the child back to Mexico, recycle, re-rent, rinse and repeat, and do it again. I mean, it's Mary, it's like you said, it sounds like a movie, but I promise you, it's not. It's real. And that's why we really deployed an intensive capability to start doing rapid DNA. And we started discovering an unbelievable amount of fake families. And again, like so many other policies that this administration dismantled, they stopped testing DNA. So Mary, I promise you right now, there are kids that are being rented and sold right now coming across our border because they know that's going to be their ticket in the United States. And this administration took away the one thing that could actually prevent that.
I mean, knowing what was being done to these children, why? What could possibly be their motivation? Because I don't see it as a way to ingratiate themselves with, the immigrant community here. Because as I mentioned, if there's anything this is causing, it's resentment between people who came here legally and people who are coming in illegally. It's anger and resentment, not jealousy, but just resentment, So what could possibly be the motivation for taking away this DNA testing? Can you try and Explain this to
I
me.
can, and here's a very good question. This is the question, but you could ask, and we need to ask the same question. Well, then why are they allowing open borders where we've had 8 million come in, where we know 30% of the young women and children are sexually assaulted and raped on the journey up here, Mary? Why would any country in the world, Mary, we are literally now facilitating, and our government is complicit in the world's largest smuggling operation going on right now at our southern border. Why would we allow that? We know, I can't tell you how many sheriff's deputies, how many border patrol agents have interviewed a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old that recounted how she was raped multiple times on the journey, how a 12-year-old, they were going through her backpack and a bag of pills dropped out. And they asked, what was this? She goes, these are morning after pills that my mother gave to me because they were anticipated I would be raped. I mean, I could go on and on with these stories. Why would any country do this? And at the end of the day, this is hard for me to come to a conclusion, but nothing else makes sense because remember, the Hispanic community that came here lawfully is different from those that came here illegally. So what this administration sees in the open border advocates is a perceived political benefit on two fronts, right? One is, remember, illegal aliens are counted part of the census. So there's a very real redistricting of House seats in the Democratic favor. The second tranche of that is that the Democratic Party believes a perceived benefit that every illegal alien they find a pathway to citizenship is going to equate to a Democratic vote. I think they're right on both of those. And then the last thing that I'll say, I've worked for the government for 40 years, 6 administrations, both Republican and Democrat. Both sides have their political agendas, right? But what I've never experienced is an administration like this one, where you have this intense political agenda and the convergence of ideology. And the ideology is pure open borders, right? Yeah. That we should not have any demarcation line with respect to our borders. So you have the political appointees and political agenda converging with the ideologues that believe in open borders. That's what's driving our national policies.
I mean, I guess I'm searching in my mind, thinking it has to be more complicated than that, right? It couldn't possibly be that simple. But I haven't heard any other explanation more significant than what you've said. It seems to really actually just be that simple.
I think it is. I think the cause and solutions are not complicated. What's happening is complicated, but how it's happening and why is not. And Mary, we talked about it before, but think about this. In the past 36 months, 2,000 dead migrants. Yeah. 2,000. And that's just the number of dead migrants that Border Patrol has recovered. That doesn't count the number of migrants recovered from local police departments along the border. It doesn't include the migrants that died in Mexico on the journey. It doesn't include the migrants that died in the Darien Gap, one of the most inhospitable, cartel-laden areas in the face of the planet. I mean, think about this. October 7th, it was under 1,400 Jews that died, and there is a war going on, and they're trying to wipe Hamas off the face of the planet, which I fully support. We've had 2,000 migrants die in the past 36 months. We have a war on our southern border, and it's against the cartels. The cartels every day are profiting from what's going on, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. They have grown from 2018, just on the human trafficking alone and human smuggling, it was about $500 million annual business, $500 million. Now it's 14 billion. I mean, we have migrants dying. We know drugs are pouring in this country. Last year, 112,000 Americans died from drug overdose and poisoning. We know that criminals, murderers, rapists, pedophiles, aggravated felons, gang members, national security threats are pouring in our country every single day. I defy anyone to tell me one single downside to securing our border.
It's absolutely mind-boggling. And, one of the things in your excellent EDIFY video, and listeners will link to Mark's video in the show notes below, is your mention of the fentanyl coming across the border and how even a small amount of that could kill scores of Americans, citizens or, resident aliens or what have you. In fact, one of the I think more difficult EDIFY interviews we've ever done here was with Rebecca Kessling, who lost two of her sons.
I know, I've talked to her. Yep.
What a difficult conversation to get through with her. Can you tell us a little bit about what's driving, given how lethal fentanyl is it coming in specifically to kill Americans? I mean, what could the possible upside be if virtually anybody who touches it dies?
Yeah. So first of all, I got to say, Rebecca, I got to say, she's one of my heroes. I watched her testimony, and this is one of the misconceptions out there. When you think of all drugs, people just think of drug addicts, of addicts. And so one of the Democratic witnesses during the testimony was talking about addiction and how part of the problem is in the United States we have this insatiable appetite for drugs. And she stopped him cold. She had a tear running down her face, and she looked at him and looked at the other congressional members of the panel and said, "Let me make something clear. My 14-year-old and 12-year-old boys didn't have an insatiable appetite for fentanyl." Right? They weren't drug addicts. Right. They were good kids. They thought they were taking a single harmless pill that unbeknownst to them was laced with fentanyl.
They thought it was Xanax or something. Yeah, they thought they were buying Xanax.
Right, exactly. I think you're right. And so that's what it's about. And that's why it's so important that we can't call these overdoses. These are poisonings. These are good. The leading cause, 18 to 45, is fentanyl. The majority of these people are good, upstanding people, made one mistake. They took a pill that was unbeknownst to them and they died. That's not addiction. That's not poison. So all the programs that people talk about, here, addiction programs, that would do nothing for the majority of people dying with fentanyl because they're not addicts, right?
But what's driving the cartels to bring fentanyl in if what it's doing is killing anybody who comes near it? Like, is it to frighten the American people? Nope. Is it sending a message? Are the cartels sending a message to other gangs here? Tell me what's going on.
No, because believe it or not, even though it's killed 100,000 Americans, in a 12-month period for the past 3 years, that's just a drop in a bucket. Right? So they don't care. For the cartels, it's all about money. And fentanyl is by far cheaper to manufacture and produce than heroin. It's a better high than heroin. And again, the price, they can push it across at a much lower price than any other opioid that they're pushing across. And so the one thing that I will agree with some of the folks that are talking about the insatiable appetite, that is true. So we do have this insatiable appetite for drugs in general, right? But again, even though we're losing 100,000 Americans per day, that's a drop in the bucket. It's not making a difference.
Okay, so it is part of the overall opioid crisis.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're making synthetic drugs and they're putting lacing fentanyl in there. But the issue is that unfortunately, until the deaths get to such a crazy number, that it starts actually impacting their profitability, nothing's going to change. But right now, even 100,000 deaths a month is not enough to stop the demand coming across the border for fentanyl for the cartels. So I would not say that I believe they're trying to intentionally kill anybody. I just say they don't care. They're making
they
money.
Don't care who dies, right?
They don't care who dies. Right. And right now, even though 100,000 people a year are dying, that's not stopping the flow of the synthetic drugs coming across.
So it's just like collateral damage.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. So, and tell me, are they working with the street gangs in the United States? Is this a dual thing between the gangs here, or do they have their own operations set up here? Hence the need to get people over the border illegally to run the illegal operations here.
Both. So when I was in the FBI, actually in Southern California, I supervised the MS-13 gang task force. So the gangs across the country, and now it's even getting more sophisticated. There are organizations that I wouldn't say I would call a gang that all operate as the drug distribution arm for the cartels. Right?
Okay.
So it is extremely sophisticated. I always say the cartels could teach a business class at Yale, at Harvard, with respect to flexibility and resiliency. They are that sophisticated. That's not hyperbole. And a lot of people think that the Mexican cartels only operate in Mexico. That's just not true. They operate throughout the entire Western Hemisphere. And think about this. They are working with China. Right? So we know China, the fentanyl precursor chemicals come directly from China to Mexico. And the cartels take it, make synthetic drugs, laced with fentanyl, and push it across our border. Once it gets across our border, I call it the drug spider web. As soon as it gets across the border, it just looks like a spider web, and it goes through the major highways into every major city, town in the entire country. And each of those areas and each state is divided into geographical regions what the drugs go into, and then you have gangs and other criminal operations then that are working with the cartels as part of that sophisticated technique and an organization to then actually distribute the drugs throughout the state and towns and cities.
honestly, if they put half of the effort and intelligence and, ingenuity into doing something lawful that they do into doing these illegal things, they could all be like the next Elon Musk. But
They could. I agree with you, Mary. I mean, if they actually took all their skill and influence and power and actually works with the government of Mexico to do things, do good things, Mexico, I think, would stand a chance. But here's a very important part about Mexico that I really think we need to be honest about. They're not our true partners. I think we have to stop looking at Mexico as true partners, because for a long time they didn't have the political will to go after the cartels because they're one of the most corrupt governments in the face of the planet. But now they don't have the capacity. So they lack both the political will and the capacity to actually do anything about the cartels. And so I hope the next president of the country has a really strong, meaningful discussion about we have to change how we've been going after the cartels. The cartels are an existential threat. They are our enemy, and we need to go after them with the same whole of government approach, tenacity, and commitment that we do terrorist organizations.
Well, and organized crime, right? Like it has all the markings of what the mafia used to be in the United States, right? Yep. And so you don't know who's working in the police force, for example, in Mexico, who might be part of the cartels. They're not stupid. They have their people placed every place. And therefore, if you're an elected official and you would like not to be assassinated or your children kidnapped or what have you, you will do what they tell you to do, right?
And that's why I say, and I subscribe to the Bill Barr approach that he penned an op-ed, I think last year, where he said we really should look at a Plan Colombia style approach where we actually used very surgical precision kinetic military operations in conjunction with the host country to go after the cartels. Because the traditional criminal prosecutorial approach that we've used to go after the cartels for the past 30 years has failed. The only thing that's happened is they've become more powerful and influential. And so we've got to change our strategy. So when I say like secure the border, there's a lot of things we need to do with respect to policy and enforcement of the law and resources, but our border will never be secure totally as long as the cartels still exist.
Right. Well, let me just pivot for a second here. I want to ask you about sanctuary cities. What do you think about that designation? Is it just kind of political theater? Chicago's a sanctuary city and we're overwhelmed. We cannot absorb one more migrant here, yet they continue to come on planes and buses every single day. I just think the whole designation, it's been, it's a lot of political theater. It's a lot of virtue signaling. And at the end of the day, it just hurts the people who believe they can come here because of the designation that this city has, elected officials have brought upon itself. But it's so harmful to the overall unified effort of the country. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree with what you just said. It's pure kabuki theater. It's pure virtue signaling. I mean, let's take New York. You could even overlay Chicago on this, right? I mean, Mayor Adams, he ran on Sanctuary City, and he was all about virtue signaling. Oh, we welcome everybody. And now what he's saying? A quote, this is going to destroy New York. We're being overrun. He's asking for more taxpayer money. I mean, I could go on and on. So wait a minute. You were all for, we'll take anybody in. But when it actually happens, then you're like, wait a minute, this is crazy. We can't handle that. So that just shows you that it is virtual signaling. Similar things are happening in Chicago, right? They're trying to bust people in other areas. And the people are saying, no, not in my area. And they're right. And this just goes to, this is just a microcosm of this strategy's, this administration strategy, right? It's one of incentivizing. So you've got an administration that's telling the entire world now is the time to come, but then you have cities within our country saying, and once you come to our cities, right? Because we're going to give you all this free stuff. So it goes back to the question you started with. Yeah, a lot of these people, they get their hopes from some of these sanctuary cities. You've got politicians, you've got quote leaders that are actually saying, we're going to give you XYZ. In New York, for a long time, they were putting them up in hotels that were charging $400 a night. That gets back. Guess what? The poor, vulnerable migrants, and I put that in air quotes, they've got cell phones. They're talking
Yep.
to their buddies in you name it, whatever country, saying, hey, I just landed in New York. First of all, I illegally entered. I got to a shelter. They gave me free food, free clothing, and a free plane ticket to New York. And I got to New York and they put me up in a $400 a night hotel. Come on
Yep.
in. This is great.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've seen the same thing in Chicago.
Yep.
At least the first wave of people, they're at the former Ditka's, hotel and restaurant on Chicago's Magnificent Mile. They were given, ones with small children were given like $300 strollers for their
Yep.
kids. I mean, they're, and again, you see the resentment from the poorer working class neighborhoods in Chicago saying, wait a second, I couldn't afford 12 hours in a hotel like that, much less, a month at a time being paid for by taxpayers.
And to your point too, I'll go back to New York. They're already talking about tax cuts, right? I mean funding cuts. They're already talking about, because they've had like $700 million in overcharge charges by NYPD, and they're actually talking about cutting salaries of NYPD officers and stop hiring new NYPD classes because they're bleeding money. And this goes back to our original point about illegal immigration versus legal immigration. A country that's actually, and think about this. So in Chicago, you see it. What is humane and what is the American way now when you have migrants that are sleeping on sidewalks and tents because there's no room at the inn anymore? That's absurd.
Right.
That's why I go back to the lawful process of which we have a system where we can only handle so many at a time. That is legitimate. That's an honest system, right? And that's what's best for our country, first and foremost, but it's also what's most effective for the migrants, that we're able to let them come in illegally. We know who they are, and then we actually have a system that's going to be able to sustain the numbers we're allowing in. I don't know why that doesn't make sense to people. Right now at the border, we usually see a downturn in the number of illegal aliens because of the cold. That's not happening right now. The past 3 days, we've hit or exceeded 9,000. 9,000 a day come to our southwest border.
No, it's you can't, just get your head around the numbers because they're so big. And I think sometimes people are thinking, no, it couldn't be 9,000 people coming through. So what is the process now when migrants, they see them walking across the water, or not across the water, but through the water into the country, and they come in? What happens to them? They're not here legally. They don't have papers. What is the process?
Yep. So right now, the Border Patrol's mission has fundamentally been transformed from a law enforcement national security mission to a processing mission. And so right now, the overwhelming majority, I think the last couple of months, it's been close to 65% of those that are coming across. They're going to be apprehended by the Border Patrol. They're going to be brought in a processing center, and they're going to be asked for basic information. And then within 12 to 36 hours, the majority of them are actually released into the United States. If you're a single adult or you're a family, you're literally just released out into the streets of the local community where shelters are available. Then shelters take over from there, Mary. And the shelters, by the way, they're subsidized by DHS by taxpayer dollars. So they'll go into a shelter. They're going to give clothes, food, and then this is what's going to happen. The shelter is going to ask the individual who just recently illegally entered the United States without any documentation at all. They're going to say, "Where would you like to go?" Montana, New York, Chicago. No problem. Here's your plane ticket.
Right. Yeah, and that's what's been. My understanding is, at least in the Catholic Charities of San Antonio has been chartering planes for migrants. And I think, there's this impression, and I think this is something the Biden administration is trying to keep alive in people's minds, that this is like mean Governor Abbott just putting people on planes, not knowing where they're going. And that is not the case. I mean, the state obviously has some role, but for the most part, it's charitable organizations who are saying, sure, we'll help you. You want to go somewhere? We'll help you. You have family in Des Moines, Iowa. We'll help you get there.
And I tell you what, Chicago, New York, DC, LA, doesn't matter. And what you're seeing right now is actually only a small portion of the illegal aliens that are coming to your city. There's a large amount that already have a system in place that they're not reliant on shelters. That's
Right.
happening every single day. So let's go real quick, because you mentioned Governor Abbott. Here's one of the biggest lies out here. First of all, the state has no role in enforcing the borders right now with respect to illegal immigration. So right now, they can't stop somebody from illegal entering. They're trying to right now. They're trying to pass some laws. Governor Abbott's doing
State
some
law
good
enforcement has no authority at the border of Mexico and the state of Texas.
Correct. They cannot enforce federal immigration law, period. So if someone illegally enters the southwest border, all they can do is apprehend them and turn them over to Border Patrol, who then subsequently processes them and releases them in the United States, because that's their mandate. But so I tell you though, and so what happens, when somebody comes across, Mary, here's what happens too. I love it when the secretary says, well, we vet everybody. That is one, I tell you, that's one of the things that my head explodes. It's an outright lie. And let me give you just one example. So in the past 36 months, they've apprehended 269 individuals from Lebanon. And I don't know. There's a small terrorist organization, Hezbollah,
Yeah.
right? And so think about that. And the majority of them are single adult males. So you take a single adult male, say 30 years old, that came from Lebanon with no documentation, illegally enters our border, and we stop him and say, okay, who are you? He gives him a name. Where are you from? Lebanon. Oh, well, okay, you're a special interest alien because we know a terrorist organization operates in Lebanon. And so they ask him, are you a terrorist? Oh, no, I'm not a terrorist. Okay, hold on a second. Let me reach out to Lebanon and ask them, hey, is this guy a terrorist? Oh, no, he's all good. Go ahead and let him into the country. I mean, that's just stupid. But that is what is actually happening every single day on our southwest border. We are letting people into the country. We have no idea who they are. We have no idea to properly vet what their background is, what their allegiance is, or whether they intend to do any harm to this country or not. But yet we are letting them in our country every single day.
It's sheer, it's like the definition of insanity, right? Just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Well, what about, let me just talk to you about another class of immigration and immigrants. So people who come in, they cross the border legally, but then they overstay their visas. So, sometimes that's for school or travel or what have you. How is that as an issue? Is that something that's manageable? Is it more, is it easier for the government to track because the people are here with some kind of tracking mechanism already sort of attached to their person? Yeah,
so that's a good point. There's a distinction. So yes, we know more about that individual, right? So, but the issue is once they overstay their visa, finding them and locating them can sometimes be just as difficult, right? Because generally someone that's going to overstay their visa, they're not going to give a legitimate address, right? So they can easily be found. They abscond. And the problem though is we have a finite number of resources. So unless we have some additional derogatory information on that individual, they're not going to be a priority. They're going to be way on the bottom of the totem pole as far as priorities to go, because our system is so overwhelmed. We have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that are here on visa overstays, and we have millions and millions of those that are here just plain illegally outside of the visa process. Our system is completely overwhelmed.
I mean, it's been just kind of my observation that unless then they're picked up for something else illegally, that's the only way we catch them. They're drunk driving, or they get into some kind of accident, and then their status gets revealed.
So that would have been that I would have said that would have been normally the way it was even under a previous Democratic administration, but not this administration. So let me give you an example. Secretary Mayorkas, this is one reason why this man, I think what he's doing is actually criminal and he should be impeached. But right now, you could be in the country illegally. You could commit another non-violent crime. You'd be picked up by a local PD. So look, for example, you could be a known gang member that was arrested for a burglary of a motor vehicle. That local sheriff's department is going to call ICE up and say, hey, I have a known illegal alien that we just arrested for burglary of a motor vehicle. You know what ICE is going to tell him, Mary? Nope, not a priority. He's not a convicted violent criminal. Go ahead and release him back to the community. That's what's happening every day, all day long under this administration.
Yeah, and they know it. And the criminals know it. They know they're not going to be taken into custody. Correct. They know they're not going to get deported. Well, where is this coming? Is this from Biden himself directly? Where is this coming from? Who's driving the bus here?
Yeah, that's another great question. Some of it, I try hard to stay away from speculation. what I would refer to this, though, is kind of an educated conclusion based on what I see. When I hear President Biden talk about the border, in my opinion, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just reading a cue card. And I get that from the limited questions and answers that go back and forth, and his answers, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So what I think is that it's a limited number of political appointees that are actually calling the shots and developing the policy. And I actually talked to people like former Chief Rodney Scott of the United States Border Patrol, who was there for the first 7 months of the Biden administration, who he said when he was there, a guy that was a career Border Patrol agent for almost 30 years, they would just dismiss him. The political appointees wouldn't even listen to him. A lot of times he wasn't even included in meetings. And so it's a political appointees that are crafting the majority of the policy going forward. And then, of course, you have Secretary Mayorkas is the one that's actually implementing it.
Oh my gosh, like with this combination, what could possibly go wrong, right? I mean,
Exactly.
like you can't even, like anyway, but so, I know, again, from my own experience as a first generation American, it was very important for my parents to assimilate. And they always told us kids, you are Americans. And that was very important to them, that we knew about this country and we learned to love this country. And it's been also my experience that a lot of, I think, younger people aren't taught civics in the same way.
Correct.
And probably couldn't pass the basic civics test my mom and dad had to pass to become citizens. What do you know anything about the current way new immigrants who are coming legally and are doing everything the right way, how they are educated about the American political system and the American way of life?
It's pretty good.
Actually. Good. I'm glad to hear that.
They still have to take a test and swear an oath and allegiance to America and the Constitution. And they have to take a test, quite frankly, that I agree with you, that I think a lot of Americans that were born in America probably couldn't pass.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think we can have an honest discussion about how we can improve the legal immigration process. I think that is a very worthwhile debate to have. But again, as we started, that's separate and apart from illegal immigration and border security and national security going forward. I can tell you right now, a lot of people don't realize the illegal aliens coming across now, they don't care about assimilation, Mary.
No,
they don't.
Right. I agree with you.
Right?
Yep.
They want 5 things. They want to be released in the country illegally with no consequences. They want to work illegally, send money home, and be free from deportation and bring family members. That's it.
Right.
There's no assimilation there. In fact, if you ask the illegal aliens of today, if we give you those 5 things, but you're never going to receive amnesty, you're never going to receive citizenship, they'd be like, no problem, I'll take it.
Right.
Well, guess what?
Right.
The Biden administration is giving that to them right now, every single day. We've had pictures of massive groups of illegal aliens rushing our border, carrying their country's flag.
Yep. Yeah, and that to me, that's so hard because I think of somebody like my dad who had to put a thing in his British passport to show and sign something that if, God forbid America ever goes back to war with Great Britain, that he would fight on the American side. And that was a big thing for him.
Sure it was.
But he said, no, I am an American now. And that is a promise I have to make. And they took it so seriously. And
but they should.
Wow.
I mean, to bring somebody into our nation and say, you are now an American, there should be some allegiance attached to that. Right, but at the same time, this is where the creation of the country really began. In my opinion, is that yes. So when you come, you pledge allegiance to this country, but you still hold on to your heritage. That's right. Yeah. That's the success of the melting pot. But it's not a melting pot when you come in from another country and you don't assimilate to America. You're not melting into anything. Right? That's the problem.
No, you can come from Ireland and still celebrate St. Patrick's Day and be just as much an American as your Italian next door neighbor or your Polish upstairs neighbor or what have you.
That's right.
So when President Trump ran in 2016, he did so on a platform where he hoped to bring some of the big corporations that have left America, to bring them back, right? And he didn't want to see the outsourcing that we're seeing at the level that we're seeing it in. And, but we know that at least one of the stated reasons that so many American companies are opening facilities outside the U.S. is because our immigration policies are making it really hard for them to kind of get the workers that they need to make their companies profitable. So, that only makes sense. You got to go where you can make money. And they wanted to be able to hire an adequate number of skilled workers. So how does the immigration policy just kind of overall address, and the Trump administration seems to have done this well, where it acknowledges that that's a problem and it tries to meet it at least.
Right.
Did you have any part in that kind of process or discussing process with people who were your peers? I know your particular work was a little bit different, but
right.
Did you see the immigration issue changing because of that while you were doing your particular job for the Trump administration?
This is a very good question, a good one to kind of end on, Mary, is that because this is where I really get fired up against Republicans as well, right? Because here's what a lot of Republicans will do. They'll say, no, stop coming, right? And they'll sit there and they'll say, we're for strong border security, but they're doing this behind closed doors. Why? Because they want the cheap labor, right? And again, what I'll say is that goes back again to illegal immigration. I understand, and I've talked to many people on Capitol Hill that we need workers and we need immigrant workers. Okay, I think everybody agrees with that. So let's sit down in a room and talk about how we can get the workers we need at a living wage legally, right? But what happens is because it's a lot easier just to say, oh no, stop coming, right? And that's what the Republicans do. They're embedded with the Chamber of Commerce because it gives them a ton of money, right? They have a lot of constituents in some of their areas that have large corporations that hire illegal aliens. And think about this too. This is another thing that frustrates me. When a company hires an illegal alien, some of these companies, what do you think they do? Substandard conditions, substandard pay, right? Because they can get away with it. Because what are the illegal aliens going to do? They have no means or ability to push back.
No recourse.
Right.
Yeah, they have no recourse.
That's again, our compassion has been hijacked. That's not the American way. So I think, hey, I'm okay paying for a little bit more for milk or whatever it is, as long as we can have individuals that we need to come here lawfully and pay them a decent wage. And then when their time is done, whether they're here on a work visa, that they go back and then they come back seasonal, whatever that is. We can do that. But we've got to make sure we have that lawful process, we enforce the law, and we stop those that are illegally entering to circumvent the system, get in front of the line, and it's an unfair competitive advantage.
Yeah. Well, Mark Morgan, thank you for your service to this country and for your forthrightness in this conversation today. I think you've given all of us more than enough food for thought, and I'm very grateful for your willingness to speak out and the compassion and kindness with which you do so.
I bet. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you for listening. To make it easier for you to listen to future EDIFY podcast episodes, please make sure you subscribe over at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thank you.